now we have Matthias, also from Google Brain Zurich. So Matthias is a research scientist at Google Brain Zurich. He received his PhD degree in sales he received his, in fact, let me see, PhD degree at Harvard University with Christopher Harvey. Before that, he studied neuroscience at ETH Zurich and biochemistry at the University of Cambridge. So today, Matthias will talk about beyond image level tasks, scalable approaches for localization and dense prediction. Matthias, please.
Good. Thanks for the introduction and for organizing this workshop. I will talk now about some work on how we can take these large pre-trained image text models that Neil and Xiaohua introduced and transfer them or use similar approaches for tasks that go beyond the image level. So structured tasks with high dimensional outputs like detection or pixel-wise outputs like panoptic segmentation, depth prediction, and so on. And so one is to keep the architectures as simple and foundational as possible so that we can achieve efficient transfer of these models that we can pre-train on large image text data to these downstream tasks that, that require like more structured and higher dimensional output. And then the other approach, or the other part of this approach is to develop unified modeling approaches in order to make the best use of the pre-trained models and also to share information across tasks rather than having a very fragmented landscape of different highly hand-tuned models. And I'll talk about these two papers on the right here on open vocabulary object detection, and then UViM, the unified modeling approach for vision. So let's get started with open vocabulary object detection. So this basically takes the open vocabulary and zero-shot capabilities of the vision language models that work on the image level and adds localization information. And this is obviously extremely useful because it combines this flexible text-based API with localization that's very important for applications like robotics or others. And the question now is how to use the vision language models that we've heard so much about and transfer them efficiently to detection. And there are quite a few works now that that do this, that build on these models like CLIP, for example, and add detection capabilities. What we try to do is to do the same, but in a very simple way, and basically strip down the components of the object detector to their bare minimum so that we can transfer as much of the vision language models as possible. And the way that we do this is basically by just removing the final token pooling of the vision encoder that converts the outputs of the encoder into a single representation that's used for image classification, and instead attach one very lightweight object detection head to each of the output tokens of the vision encoder. And then we can use the text encoder as usual to encode object names and use them for classifying our detection outputs. And so we have our pre-trained vision language model, and then we make this small architectural modification, which means that over 99% of the parameters are actually transferred from pre-training. And then we can train this on standard detection data sets using the set prediction loss that was made popular by Detter. And so this is the simple setup, and there are a couple of important implementation details that make this both efficient and powerful. And I'll go over these sort of one by one. So one element to keep things simple is that we do not use any image text fusion between the vision encoder and the text encoder. And this kind of fusion is something that other object detectors do, and intuitively that seems reasonable and important because you might want to guide the image compute based on the queries that you are trying to detect. But it also has disadvantages, and we found that by separating them, we actually can do certain things much more efficiently than if you have this fusion. For example, you can embed text encodings independently of the image and then just score them later. So you can do a lot of caching and do certain things much faster. And a similar thing that we did is to basically embed every class that we're trying to detect in the image independently. So it's a separate forward pass through the text transformer. And that also sort of decouples the compute for different queries. So some models concatenate the queries that they are trying to detect into one long string, but that means that if you change one of them, you have to change all of them, or you have to recompute the embeddings. But what we can do if we do that separately is to cache everything and then just do one matrix multiplication at the end in order to score the predicted objects. Another change that we made from models that inspired this architecture, like DETR, is to use a sigmoid cross-entropy loss rather than a softmax cross-entropy loss, because in the open vocabulary setting, we do not want to assume that the different object queries are mutually exclusive, which will be implied by the softmax cross-entropy loss. So one object could have multiple queries that apply to it, and we represent this with the sigmoid loss. And then on the image side, we have two simplifications that that make this fast and efficient and stable to train, which is that we completely get rid of the decoder that is present, for example, in DETR, and we directly use the output tokens of the vision transformer to feed them to the prediction heads. And this means that most of the parameters on the image side can be pre-trained using these image level tasks, and we don't have the decoder parameters or object queries like these object query embeddings that we would have to train on the detection task where we have relatively few data. And the stability of this approach is also improved by biasing the box outputs in such a way that at the beginning of training, when the model doesn't know anything yet, each box is basically centered at the location that corresponds to the image location for this image patch. And of course, during training, this can be changed because the output patches do not strictly need to encode anything about that particular image location. But in the beginning of training, this stabilizes things because it breaks symmetries that make the matching in this set prediction loss easier. So with this, we basically developed like a simple approach to transfer these image text models to detection. And then we did a scaling study to understand under which conditions and how we can transfer as much as possible of the semantic information that's learned during pre-training to object detection. And here is just an overview over this scaling study where I'm showing the image level performance. So that's zero-shot evaluation on ImageNet of the parent model. And then the object level performance after fine-tuning these vision language models on detection tasks on the x-axis, on the y-axis. So image on the x-axis, object level on the y-axis. And what we can see is that image level performance is kind of required to get good object level performance, but it's not enough. So there are some models that do pretty well on the image level performance, but do very poorly on the object level. And these are primarily smaller models that were trained for a very long time on the image level data, but then fine-tuned on object detection, they cannot really transfer very well. And you can see this here plotted in a different way, where we show the amount of pre-training on the x-axis. So that's pre-training example seen, including repetitions. And then on the y-axis is performance, in this case, ImageNet. And you can see that across different model architectures and sizes, you get continued scaling as you increase pre-training beyond the amount of pre-training that we explored here. And it doesn't stop, basically. But if you look at object detection after this transfer, then you can see that for the smaller models, you reach a peak and it sort of starts going down again as you do more pre-training. So there's something that's preventing the model from using the knowledge that it learned during pre-training and transferring it to detection. And our contribution and our goal during this study was basically to find out how we can continue the scaling. And the answer is, as usual, model size. So making the models larger allows them to learn more from the pre-training, and then that also transfers and scales better during detection. And then also making the best possible use of the detection data that you have in order to transfer these models. So increasing resolution, adding certain augmentations and regularizations is important to continue the scaling. And if you do that, then you can make best use of your pre-training knowledge, which obviously is the goal because that's cheap and we have vast amounts of data, which we don't for the object detection. Another interesting finding that we had in the scaling study is how the different architectures compare to each other with respect to scaling. And Neil already mentioned how this behaves for vision transformers on the image level, where we can see that pure transformers have a better scaling, scaling progression than hybrid networks or pure ResNets. And we actually see the same, maybe even stronger for object detection, where we can see in orange, in the orange crosses here, that at small model sizes, which we measure on the x-axis here in terms of the compute of the models, the hybrid models that contain some convolutions actually perform very well and maybe even better than the pure vision transformers. But as we scale up to very large architectures, the vision transformers overtake and get better than the hybrids. So probably further scaling should focus on the pure vision transformers. Another curious finding that we made in this scaling study comparing the architectures was that the different architectures have different inductive biases or preferences for the task that they learn. So here I'm comparing on the x-axis the overall detection performance, and on the y-axis the detection performance on unseen classes, so the zero-shot performance. And especially for the smaller models, you can see this difference between the orange crosses, which are the hybrid models, and the vision transformers. And you can see that at a given overall model strength, the vision transformers have higher zero-shot performance. And we haven't really looked deeply into that, so it's not quite clear why this is or where it comes from. But it suggests that basically vision transformers tend to maybe learn more or transfer more of the semantic information from the pre-training, whereas maybe ResNets are better at absorbing some of the information that's present in the fine-tuning data. Maybe this will be interesting to explore further. So with this scaling and with the training recipe that we developed, we can achieve pretty good results with this fairly simple approach of transferring image level models to object detection. So at the top here, we show some results using this LVIS base training approach, which some papers use, where you basically limit the object detection data that you use for fine-tuning. And we do pretty well there, but our model is not the most label efficient. But if we go to the unrestricted full open vocabulary training, where we use Objects 365 and Visual Genome for the object detection training, and then evaluate open vocabulary on LVIS, we get very good results there. And presumably, this could be scaled further by scaling up the object level training. OK, so then, of course, what's ultimately most interesting in the in the open vocabulary setting is this in the wild performance, which is what this workshop is all about, and what the elevator benchmark is also about, where we have this large set of different and very, very diverse tasks. And we evaluated our model on that too, and it does fairly well. I mean, there are some tasks, some particular ones where it lags behind a little bit, like mushroom detection or detecting packages. But overall, if you look at the median performance across tasks, it performs quite well. So we think that these simple approaches trained in the right way also work well for object detection. And overall, I'm very excited about this benchmark and this direction of going further, to more diverse data sets. And I think we should continue pushing on that, because even on something like LVIS, we're probably starting to reach some sort of limit in the diversity there. So yeah, very excited about this direction. Now, so far, I've been talking about text condition detection, but because of this, this image text pre-training, where images and text are embedded into the same space, we don't have to use text embeddings to define the object classes that we want to detect. You can also basically use example images and encode them with the vision backbone, and then somehow select an embedding and use those as queries. And then you basically change your text conditioned open vocabulary detection model to an image conditioned detection model, which performs few shot detection because every one of the example images is basically like a single training example. And most of the current object detection models that use this image text approach are in principle capable of this, but this kind of task has not been explored very much. So we thought we'd just try it because it's very useful in some settings where you might not be able to describe in words very well what you try to detect, like these electronic parts, for example, where we're choosing the example on the left and then detecting the object on the right. And what we found is that this works quite well out of the box without any task-specific designs. And in fact, it works much better than the current state-of-the-art models that are designed specifically for this task. Of course, we use a lot more pre-training data, but we get improvements of 70% or so over the task-specific baselines there. So I think that this is an interesting direction that deserves a little bit more attention because it's very useful, especially for robotics, where you might want to point out an object that you can't describe in text and things like that. Okay, so this was now specifically about object detection and how to build a very general and simple model for that. But now I'm going to talk about a second work that goes even further and aims to build a unified modeling approach for all of these structured high-dimensional image tasks that go beyond image level classification or things like that. This is called UViM and work by some other colleagues in Zurich, like Alexander Kolesnikov, Andre Pinto, Lucas Bayer, Shawa, and others. So the motivation for this, which we already heard in the first keynote and the introduction, is that computer vision models, especially those for dense or structured tasks, are very complex and fragmented. So if we look, for example, at detectors like DETR, it has a lot of different components like a backbone, encoder, decoder, some prediction heads, and so on. And even though we can get pretty good performance without some of those, like I showed earlier, if we really want to go to the state of the art and pure detection, then it's becoming more and more complex. So the state of the art is even more complex now than DETR. And the same is true for alternative approaches like mask RCNN style approaches. And then what's even more worrying is that if we go to a different task, like depth prediction, then we have similarly complex models, but they are completely different or largely different in their design to, say, detection models. So these are just some examples that are current state of the art in depth prediction or colorization, and they are all different in their design. And the question now that was addressed by the UViM project is, why is this the case, and how can we overcome this? So let's take a step back and look at how this works for classification, where we have a single output, and why we cannot use similarly simple models for more complex tasks. So in classification, we have an input image, and then we take that through a feed-forward model that we call the base model here, which can be a vision transformer, for example. And then we output a single probability distribution over the class, for example. And that's fine because we only have one output. But if we go to a high-dimensional task like colorization, where we need one output for each pixel, now things become much more complicated because we have to coordinate the predictions across the pixels. They have some correlations, some high-level structure, and feed-forward models like the vision transformer are not able to do this because they basically model the probabilities somewhat independently. And if we try to train them directly on these high-dimensional tasks like colorization, we get outputs like the one on the right here, where each individual pixel has reasonable outputs, but neighboring pixels are not coordinated. So what the state-of-the-art models do is they basically hand design some inductive biases that guide the predictions of the base model in order to decorrelate the predictions. So here, for example, we try to somehow build in the information that the left of the image has red peppers and the right of the image has green peppers. And if we can just give that simple information to the model, then it can now predict a high dimensional, like pixel-wise output that is also well coordinated sort of on the semantic level. And the question now is, how can we automate this rather than having to hand design specific architectures to get this information in? And this is what the UViM project is about, where we have a language model that is supposed to model these high-level dependencies between different image regions. And it can do that because it's autoregressive. And then we combine that with the base model, which is very good at providing these high-dimensional outputs, but needs a little bit of help in terms of this, this guiding code. And what the guiding code basically is like a learned representation that's short and discrete, and that's equivalent to these instructions like red on the left and green on the right. And of course, we couldn't do that naively because this language model, which is autoregressive, can't really output very, very high dimensional outputs because that's very slow because it's autoregressive. So this guiding code, which is like a short bottleneck in between, is really the key. And the question now is, how do we train this in such a way that that the language model learns a good guiding code? And this is done in two separate training stages, where first we train the base model. So that's the model that takes the input image and outputs the output image, and it needs this guiding code. So where do we get the guiding code from? Well, we take a third model that's basically used only during training that's called the restricted oracle. And this is a model that gets the final desired output, so the ground truth as input, and outputs a guiding code that is then fed to the base model. And both of these are trained end to end. And the idea is that this restricted oracle, even though it has access to the ground truth, it has to compress that into this guiding code. So it basically works like an autoencoder, and this is in fact implemented as a VQ VAE. So we train this, and then we have a base model that can interpret the guiding code. And then in the second stage, we use a language model to emulate the outputs that the restricted oracle has learned. But now, instead of inputting the ground truth, which we obviously don't have access to during like inference, we use the input image as the input to this language model. And then it learns the guiding code, which can then be used to guide the base model. And there are some tricks involved to make this stable, like token dropout and so on, but they are described in the paper. So after training, we can then combine these two, and we then have this autoregressive language model that is very good at modeling these high-level dependencies between image regions, and the base model that's very good at efficiently generating high-dimensional outputs. And together, this ends up working quite well. And in the paper, there are different example tasks that span a very wide variety of different domains, like scene understanding in panoptic segmentation, or monocular depth estimation, which is sort of a 3D scene understanding task, and then also conditional image generation, like this colorization task. And we can see that this unified approach works quite well without sort of task-specific architectural details. It is close to state-of-the-art, but doesn't reach state-of-the-art in all cases, but it's like close to some of the recent state-of-the-art models. But the really exciting part about this is that it's really the same model for all of these tasks. And here's the complete config difference between these tasks, where you basically just change the image size and maybe the loss, like whether it's a cross-entropy loss or a mean-squared error loss, and the learning rate. But other than that, it's all the same. Another exciting aspect of this model is that because you basically have this probability distribution over these guiding code tokens, you can sample diverse but stable outputs from this model if you don't take the maximum probability one, but sort of increase the temperature and then sample from this probability distribution, you can get nice and diverse outputs. Okay, so I talked about two projects that try to take various aspects of this vision language idea and make them more general and useful for tasks beyond image level tasks. And I'll talk more about the OWL-ViT project on Thursday morning at the poster session. We also have an interactive demo for that, which I encourage you to check out. And you should also check out the paper for the UViM project. And if there's time for questions, I'm happy to take them now.
Yeah, I think let's give 2 minutes for questions. So any questions from the audience? So let me ask one question. So I really got surprised by the simplicity of the OWL-ViT, the kind of object detection head. Seems that it's really just gonna classify. It's merely I think you add two linear layers on top of the ViT model. One to predict the kind of classification logics, like classification logics, one to predict the bounding box regression. How do you find the kind of the performance on object detection, for example, on simple COCO tasks, this kind of thing? Because traditionally people use FP and this kind of pyramid feature to solve a small kind of solve problems like small objects. So how does this very, very simple design kind of on standard benchmark like COCO?
Yeah. So it's a little bit more complex. It's not two linear layers, but one of them has a small MLP in between as well. But it is quite simple. But it's right. On COCO, this model does not perform as well as the state-of-the-art models. And I think the trade-offs for the open vocabulary benchmarks like ELVIS are different, where the classification is much, much harder. So it's not so important to get very, very precise detections there. And that's why the simple detection architecture does very well on ELVIS. But it's true, if we fine tune in a completely supervised way on COCO, then this is not state of the art. You can get close by training on larger data sets and so on, but it's not quite there. And I guess I'm very excited about sort of intermediate amounts of complexity that you can build in, like this paper that was mentioned before about exploring plain vision transformers for object detection, which takes an architecture like this and then adds on just a simple feature pyramid or something like that. That could maybe be a good middle ground. But yeah, I mean, we just maximized simplicity and yeah, cut some corners that reduce performance on COCO.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jianwei, please.
Yeah. Thanks. So thanks for the great talk. So I also have a question about the OWL-ViT. So mentions you showed a plot that build the correlation between the zero-shot image classification performance and the zero-shot object detection performance, and you compared with across three different architecture: the ResNet and the hybrid and the ViT. So if I remember correctly from Neil or Xiaohua's slides, the hybrid architecture is trying to concatenate the ResNet, the convolutional either at the first stage and then the ViT at the single stage. So I'm not sure whether this is a very kind of standard setting or standard architecture design. So did you ever try to, for example, use other advanced hierarchical architecture like Swing or other kind of type of architecture, combining the convolution and the attention together? So yeah, so this is basically
Yeah, thanks for the question. That's an excellent question. The short answer is no, we haven't tried those. I think something like Swin would probably work very well for this task. But again, I mean, we try to keep it as simple as possible. And I mean, one goal is also to use architectures that also work for other tasks very well. And a lot of our research, like what Neil and Xiaohua showed, is focusing on pure vision transformers that work well for classification and are very well established there. So we try to transfer them without making changes to the architecture. But But like another sort of interesting architectural thing to explore is changes that you can introduce after pre-training. Like you could do something like the Swin transformer, but only introduce that after pre-training, where you just window the attention or something like that. So I'm excited to try stuff like that, but I don't have any results to share there.
I see. Yeah. A quick follow-up question is that so basically the zero shot you are showing here is training on the base category, and then evaluate on the novel category. Well, actually you directly pull some feature, extract some region feature, and do the zero shot matching.
Oh, no. So here I train on actually on non-LVIS data sets. So objects 365. No, in this plot, it's actually open images and visual genome. But we filter out the rare categories so that then when we evaluate on rare categories from LVIS, it's zero shot performance.
I see. Yeah. So sorry. One more quick question is: Did you ever try to directly evaluate on the length feature without any kind of fine tuning on what pre-training on the object detection dataset? So is the observation similar or aligned with the observation you are seeing here?
Yeah, so we've tried that sometimes like anecdotally, and there's also other work by colleagues that uses like frozen backbones. But I think that requires a little bit heavier heads that then are fine-tuned. So just evaluating on the features that come out of CLIP or similar backbones directly, like we haven't had much luck with. So I guess they are not localized enough because they have this final pooling layer. Yeah. But of course, it would be interesting to figure out some pre-training, maybe something self-supervised that can increase the localization. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Thanks. Great talk. Thank you.